Good morning. This is the webinar for the release of the draft CalEnviroScreen version 4.0. We'll begin in a few minutes after a few more have had a chance to join. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you again for joining. It looks like a number of people are still joining, so we'll start in another minute or two. So good morning again, and welcome to the CalEnviroScreen 4.0 webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and by entering, you're agreeing to being recorded. Today we're providing Spanish interpretation through Zoom. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Nancy from Translang, who will describe how to listen in Spanish.
Si usted desea escuchar esta presentación en español, busque en su pantalla este icono de interpretación. Ahora verá los canales de idiomas. Haga clic en español. Para escuchar solo en español, haga clic en silenciar audio original o mute original audio. Para usar la función de interpretación de idioma, los participantes tienen que descargar la aplicación de Zoom en su desktop, teléfono inteligente o tableta.
So thank you and good morning. I'm John Faust, chief of one of the 4 scientific branches in the California EPA's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. We have a relatively full agenda today, but we do expect to have some time at the end to respond to a few of your questions and comments. In a moment, I'm going to provide a little more information about how you can comment. So the focus of today's webinar is on the proposed new version of CalEnviroScreen. We'll cover what it is, the importance of the tool and its uses, and the changes we're proposing in the draft 4.0 version. We'll then briefly share some observations about the draft results, describe a preliminary analysis of race and ethnicity and its relationship to the draft scores, followed by a demonstration of the materials we're making available to the public and how to access them. Towards the end, we'll talk about our upcoming public process and how you'll be able to participate. And then at the end, we'll also address a few questions. Next slide, please. So we welcome comments and questions throughout the webinar. To ask a question, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the viewing screen. You can then type in your question and click send. As time permits, we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. We may not get to all questions and comments today, but we will save what we receive, which will become part of the public comment. We hope that many of you are able to participate in future workshops related to the draft release. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Yana Garcia, the California EPA's Deputy Secretary for Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations, for some introductory remarks. Yana?
Great, thanks, John, and good morning and welcome, everybody. My name is Yana Garcia, and as John mentioned, I serve as the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and California-Mexico Border Relations at the California Environmental Protection Agency, or CalEPA. I'd like to start by just thanking all of you for being here with us today, for taking the time to learn more about the updates we've recently made to our CalEnviroScreen tool. This tool is extraordinarily useful to us in a wide array of contexts across all of our programs and throughout our work. At its core, this tool really reflects what we've known for too long, which is that too many communities across our state are exposed to high levels of pollution and are vulnerable to its effects. And to see which communities have the highest levels of pollution and highest levels of vulnerability, several years ago, we developed this mapping tool that is now called CalEnviroScreen, which presents information about pollution, health, and social and economic factors that affect some Californians more than others. This type of tool is so important because it gives us a way to understand where we need to focus our efforts to really drive down pollution burdens and address ongoing health and other challenges affecting families and communities across our state, which today is more important than ever. We use this tool to focus our programs and our investments to better understand the needs of residents in rural and urban communities wherever we do our work. And by using CalEnviroScreen, I truly believe that we're better equipped to ensure the fair treatment of all Californians and to work toward achieving environmental justice across our state. And public participation and public input are so critical to this tool and to our work. So again, I really want to thank you all for being here today. I want to encourage you to join several of our workshops, which we'll be holding over the next several months. And really just encourage you to give us your feedback and let us know what you think about the tool. And thanks again for participating in today's webinar. Turning it over to you, Lauren.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren Zeiss. I'm Director of the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and I'd also like to welcome you to this webinar and thank you for participating. We're really happy to be releasing CalEnviroScreen 4.0, and as you've just heard, it supports California's efforts to protect environmental, to provide environmental protections and to fund environmental projects in our most impacted communities. And the process to get to this point was started over a decade ago with stakeholder collaborations and work groups discussing approaches to address pollution burdens from multiple sources and community vulnerabilities. So in 2010, we released a scientific framework for assessing cumulative impact. And in 2013, the first version of CalEnviroScreen was released. Since that time, the data and methods have continued to improve our ability to look at the community level, and version 4.0 reflects a number of improvements. So today we're very happy to be providing you an overview of this latest version. critical to the development of CalEnviroScreen, as Jana has just pointed out. Critical to this has been ground truthing the tool in communities. And so this year we will be doing this virtually through a series of online regional workshops. And we hope you'll participate in these workshops and also provide any written comments you choose to make. And we're also looking forward to the Q&A at the end of the webinar. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Laura August.
All righty. Thank you, both Lauren and Jana, for those introductions. Looks like everyone can see the slides. Okay, and myself. So hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura August. I'm a research scientist at OEHA, and I'm chief of the group that is responsible for developing and updating CalEnviroScreen. So I'm going to walk through a brief presentation on what is CalEnviroScreen and talk about some of the major updates that we're releasing in the draft, as well as give a demo of how to access the materials and maps, and we'll close it out with how to provide input and a Q&A. So here we go. So CalEnviroScreen at its heart is a mapping tool or spatial analysis that helps identify California communities that are most affected by multiple sources of pollution and where people are especially vulnerable to the effects of pollution. In this 4.0 update that we're out for public comment, we have 21 indicators that we combine into a single score to give us information about the relative burdens at the census tract scale, where there are about 8,000 in California. And as you know, we're here to get input on our draft CalEnviroScreen 4.0, which we released for public comment last week. So I'm going to just go ahead and turn off my video so it's a little easier to follow the slides. So this slide here describes the overall timeline and history of events that led to the development and updating of the CalEnviroScreen tool. Lauren touched a bit on some of the early steps that were involved to get where we are, but briefly, steps include California's initial environmental justice statutes and our EPA advisory committee, which formed some of those recommendations around considering cumulative impacts in communities, as well as the definition of cumulative impacts. And Lauren alluded to our multi-stakeholder cumulative impacts work group that provided our office on direction in this project from 2008 to 2013, where we also released our scientific report that proposed the screening method. And following that, OEHA, we engaged in robust consultation process that resulted in the first version in 2013 through version 3.0, which was finalized in 2017, to here we are today to talk about our draft update of the latest version. So briefly, I'll touch upon some uses of CalEnviroScreen. There's not enough time to touch upon all of them, but we wanted just to let everyone know that in addition to using it internally at Cal EPA, as Jana mentioned, for example, within our environmental justice small grant program and some of our environmental justice enforcement task force, and as well as conducting trainings and outreach. Its used uses within government statutes include maybe the most well-known use of CalEnviroScreen through what we call the identification of disadvantaged communities, which is part of Senate Bill 535 and Assembly Bill 1550, and where disadvantaged communities have been identified as the communities or census tracts that fall into the highest scoring 25% by CalEnviroScreen scores. And these areas have been specifically targeted for investment of proceeds from the state's cap and trade program. One other mention in state government would be in implementing Senate Bill 673 and Assembly Bill 617. The Department of Toxic Substances Control and the California Air Resources Board have utilized CalEnviroScreen. Moving to the outside ring of this slide, there are both internal and external uses for grant programs where CalEnviroScreen is used. CalEnviroScreen scores are used as a factor to determine grant eligibility. And we also found an interesting use when it was used for hiring in Fresno. And in addition, we've also seen CalEnviroScreen used as a model for developing other environmental justice screening tools in other states, such as Washington, and regions such as this tool shown here, which is in the Houston area. So now we'll switch to talking about what the nuts and bolts of the tool. So the tool itself is made up of indicators or data sets that fall into 4 broad groups that we call components. So at the top, we have our different components of pollution burden, which are indicators of exposure. And that this includes ways that people come in contact with pollution, such as the air they breathe or the water they drink. When we talk about our component of environmental effects, these are adverse environmental conditions caused by pollutants. And here we're including things or data that contribute to environmental degradation, such as contaminated cleanup sites or places where hazardous waste is generated or treated, for example. On the bottom of the slide are what we consider vulnerabilities in the population, and we have 2 different categories. On the bottom left, we have a component of sensitive populations, which we consider are populations with physiological conditions that result to increased vulnerability to pollution, such as low birth weight babies or asthma. And then on the bottom right is our component of socioeconomic factors, which are community characteristics that result in increased vulnerability. And these are based on some of the scientific evidence that these type of factors, such as low income, populations, for example, have greater adverse response to the impacts of pollution. So on this slide, we see the 21 indicators that are in CalEnviroScreen 4.0. Just to note that 20 of the indicators are the same indicators in previous versions. On the bottom left, you see our new indicator, children's lead risk from housing, that we'll go into in detail and further in the presentation. But without going into detail in all of the indicators, we'll see on the far left are our 8 indicators of pollution exposure related to things in the environment, such as air quality, such as our ozone or particulate matter, 2.5, drinking water contaminants, sources of emission of polluting facilities, as well as pesticide use. The next, moving over, are our indicators of environmental effects. And these include data such as the presence of solid waste facilities, cleanup sites, impaired waters, or hazardous waste facilities. And that makes up the set of indicators that we use to represent pollution burden. To represent population characteristics, moving to the green side of the table, we have indicators of sensitive populations. And this includes certain health measures such as emergency department visits for asthma and cardiovascular disease to represent the vulnerability based on these type of health conditions. And then on the far right are our 5 indicators of socioeconomic factors. And here we include measures such as poverty, linguistic isolation, and unemployment, for example. All right, so moving to what's new in version 4.0. So as a starting point, we've updated the data for our existing 12 indicators, improvements in methods, as well as updated years for all of our indicators is part of this draft update. A key update on the top right that you heard me mention is the new indicator. We're proposing a new indicator of exposure to reflect children's risk of lead exposure from old housing, and I'll talk about that. At the bottom, we want to mention that we've launched also a centralized data portal that we call the CalEnviroScreen Hub. And as John mentioned, we've also conducted a preliminary analysis of CalEnviroScreen scores and race ethnicity that will show you how to access. So this slide here shows some of the key indicator-specific updates. We also put together a summary report called a Summary of Changes document that will show you where it is on our website to get all of the details on all of the updates that are included in the draft. But right now, I'm going to go over some of the key updates by indicator. So starting on the top left For our drinking water contaminants indicator on the top left here, we have updated some of the contaminants included in the indicator, for example, such as using improved lead monitoring data that gets us information about closer to the tap of what people are drinking. And the indicator also includes full coverage of community water system service areas so that we are able to understand what populations in the state are drinking what water. Moving next across the top to our pesticide use indicator. We're incorporating additional pesticides here in the indicator, and this was based on a revisiting of pesticides that meet our criteria of both hazard and volatility for inclusion in the indicator. And in our report, you'll see what those pesticides are if you're interested. Next, on the top left, within our indicator of groundwater threats, and this is an environmental effects indicator, we are proposing to incorporate data on dairies and feedlots proposed for inclusion over some concerns to potential impacts of groundwater and soil. So that's something we're folding into that larger indicator of groundwater threats. Now, on the bottom of the screen, on the bottom left, we're proposing to include chrome plating facilities within our hazardous waste indicator. Again, that's an indicator of environmental effects. As these facilities are both generators of hazardous waste and there are concerns that they can impact air and water. So we're proposing to include that subset into our hazardous waste indicator. Next, in the bottom in the middle, some general points about improvements of some of our air quality indicators. For specifically the methodology to reflect particulate matter to less than 2.5 concentrations across the state includes the combination of both monitoring and satellite data, which was not previously utilized in order for us to better characterize the state, areas of the state that are further from the regulatory monitors. For our diesel particulate matter indicator, this uses emission estimates that are more refined and are derived from a 1 kilometer grid, which is a lot smaller of a unit that was previously used. And then on the bottom right, across multiple indicators, we continue to incorporate improved data at the California-Mexico border in order to account for cross-border pollution. One example of this is of including facilities in our toxic release indicator, including facilities in Mexico into the calculation of the indicator, among other updates that are described in our summary. So this is to talk about the new indicator that we're proposing in version 4.0, our indicator of children's lead risk from housing. So we know that lead house paint remains the most significant exposure, lead exposure in children. And although other sources of environmental lead exposure are already included in CalEnviroScreen, such as in drinking water or toxic releases, for example, we're proposing to include this exposure indicator to screen for areas that have the highest potential for lead exposure from old housing. So the indicator incorporates 2 measures of known risk factors, information on the age of housing that we derive from the percent of homes with a likelihood of lead-based paint hazards. And we combine that with low-income households with children, and since we focus on the most vulnerable population, children. So that is combined to give us our overall final lead risk score from housing. These different factors are weighted, and we describe more information on how we determined the weights of the lead-based paint hazards from housing and information on income. And this indicator, we also have released a indicator map, interactive map. So you can take a look at this indicator in interactive format and searching census tracts across the state. And so we'll show you how to access that as well. All right, now that I've gone through the indicators and the major updates, I'll quickly talk about how we bring it all together to derive a CalEnviroScreen score and what the results look like for this version. So how we conduct indicator scoring is we used a percentile-based approach. So each census tract, and again, there's about 8,000 in the state, we have raw information for all of the indicators by census tract, and we assign them a percentile based on where that census tract falls within the statewide distribution. So for example, here we have a census tract in the Los Angeles region where you can see the percentiles for some of the indicators. And again, percentiles represent a relative score for the 21 indicators. And in this example, you see that particulate matter 2.5 has a score of 92, meaning that it is this value that it has for PM 2.5 is higher than 92% of all other census tracts in California. So when we show our demo of how to access the online maps, you'll see these numbers, and this gives an understanding of what they represent. So this is a visual to show how we combine all of our indicators to come up with a component score. You heard me talk about our 4 components. Here are the 8 indicators that make up our exposure component. The percentiles for those are averaged together to come up with an exposure score. And then here's a visual showing how we combine them all. Exposures and environmental effects are combined, multiplied by the combination of sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors indicators to come up with overall CalEnviroScreen scores, which is the map you see from the green to red color scale on our website. So overall draft CalEnviroScreen 4.0 results. Some of you may have looked already on our website, an interactive map. Here is a map of showing the pattern for the state. And the overall pattern from green being the lowest CalEnviroScreen scores to red being the highest or most impacted census tracts look very familiar to the distribution of what we've seen in previous versions, including CalEnviroScreen 3.0. We do look at within the highest scoring 25% of census tracts, those that have been considered the disadvantaged communities, there is a high level of similarity between the versions at 86%. So yeah, we urge folks to take a look at the online interactive maps on their own time. And then to wrap it up here before we do our demo of online resources, we wanted to let attendees know about the preliminary analysis that we've conducted on race and ethnicity. So while the CalEnviroScreen tool itself does not include indicators of race or ethnicity, we've used the results to examine issues of equity with respect to race and are proposing or are showing this preliminary analysis. And so we have put together a PDF report that you can find on our website, as well as an interactive story map as a way to walk through the results. And just to highlight of some of the results, which are consistent with what we've seen in previous versions of CalEnviroScreen. On the top left, you see these 2 circle or donut charts. On the left, within the least impacted neighborhoods, so these are the lowest CalEnviroScreen scores, we see that they're comprised of 33% people of color, while 67% of the people in those areas are white, identify as white. But within the most impacted neighborhood on the right side of that chart, these are the highest scoring areas identified in CalEnviroScreen. It's overwhelmingly made up of people of color at 90%, while only 10% white. And on the far right of this slide, some of you may have seen a type of visual like this before, where from the very top, we're looking at the lowest decile or lowest 10% of CalEnviroScreen scores. And as you move towards the bottom of the chart, the increase in CalEnviroScreen scores, we provide the racial makeup by score. And so you can see, for example, in the pink are Latino populations in the state. And within the highest scoring is overwhelmingly at 73%. The highest scoring decile is made up of Latino people at 73%. All right, so now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Walker Wheland, who's going to demo how to access the online resources that I've talked about, and as well as the interactive map. So I'm going to switch over to the website.
All right. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and keep my video off so that folks can see as much of the screen as possible. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and good morning to you all. I'm Walker Wheland, a research scientist with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. I wanted to just show you quickly some of the resources that we've been working hard on developing around related to online ways to access CalEnviroScreen information. So if you go to oeha.ca.gov/CalEnviroScreen, you'll come to our main landing page for CalEnviroScreen, and you'll see there that we have a link to draft version 4.0. So that page is going to contain all of the most important information around version 4.0. And we want to also point out that all of the information that I'll be talking about today is available in Spanish. You can see that the link on our page that the mouse just hovered over, you can access Spanish a version of all of the content that I'm talking about. We also have a little bit further down on this page a link to get to upcoming information on our workshops that we'll be having. And please bookmark this page and check back at this page. There's more information coming very soon on our upcoming workshops, and also how to submit a comment on CalEnviroScreen. Just below that, you can access the version 4.0, the draft version 4.0 report for CalEnviroScreen. And for those of you who have used CalEnviroScreen before, or who have seen the 3.0 version, you might want to take a look at the document entitled Proposed Changes in Draft Version 4.0, which gives a high-level overview of some of the main changes that we have made and some of the things that Laura has talked about in her presentation. So if you scroll a little bit further down, you'll see that we have our mapping tool that shows the overall results for CalEnviroScreen. This is embedded on our page, and you can navigate the map on our page, but I'm just going to open it up in full screen here to make it a little bit easier to view. And this map is very similar in terms of style and function as our 3.0 results map. So when you go to the map, a splash screen will appear, and you'll go ahead and click OK. And then you can use this map similar to other types of mapping tools online, similar to Google Maps, for example. You can zoom, you can pan and drag and go to a community of interest. But what we could also do here, to be a little bit more specific, is to use the search tool in the upper left-hand corner and type in a location in California and select it. And so the map will zoom to that location for your own convenience. And then you can click on any census tract. And you can see here in Fresno, we have a range of scores ranging from the darker green colors representing the lowest CalEnviroScreen scores, all the way up to the darker red colors, which represent the highest CalEnviroScreen scores. And those are the most burdened communities from CalEnviroScreen. So you can click on an individual census tract and get more information about that census tract. And one little thing that I like to do here, there is a button in the top right-hand corner of this window where you can dock this window to the side. And so now you can see clearly that the area highlighted in blue on this map is the census tract that you've selected. And the pop-up window corresponds to data from CalEnviroScreen associated with that census tract. So in this pop-up window, we can see the overall CalEnviroScreen percentiles, but also there's information on individual indicator percentiles as well. And as Laura talked about in her presentation, these numbers range from 0 to 100, and they represent the relative percentile rank that any given indicator falls within for this particular census tract. So at the very top here, I see the exposures component window, and there's a ozone number of 85. So that means that this census tract is higher in ozone concentrations than 85% of the rest of the state. So that's a way to interpret the percentile rankings for any given indicator. If you scroll a little bit further down in this pop-up window, you'll see that we have our pie charts that are profiles of race and ethnicity and of age for this particular census tract. So you can hover your mouse over any piece of the pie chart and you'll see the percentage that a particular race or ethnicity is made up of the census tract, and also an approximate count of the people of that race or ethnicity. And you can see that from the age pie chart, you can do the same thing below, where we look at those between ages 10 and 64, and then children age 10 or less, or elderly age 65 or greater. So that's just a quick overview of our results map. I encourage you to take a look. You can access it from our website. And there's just one more website I wanted to also talk about. We've been working hard for this version to develop a new website that Laura had mentioned, that's focused around open data, mapping, and our events. And this is called the CalEnviroScreen Hub. So you can get to the Hub website from our OEHA website. And this is what it looks like. And to be clear, all of the information on the Hub website is also found on the 4.0 website. So all of the information will be the same on both of the websites. So you'll be able to find that easily. But this website is a little bit more data and mapping centric, or mapping and data focused. And so you can see here that we are laying out what's new in version 4.0. If you scroll down a little bit further, we've got our map that's embedded here as well. And you can navigate that map the same way that we were demonstrating just earlier. And if you scroll down further, we've got some supplemental maps that we want to highlight for version 4.0. The first is a story map that represents the preliminary analysis that our team has done that relates race or ethnicity to CalEnviroScreen scores, and shows unique information and unique styles of mapping around race and ethnicity and CalEnviroScreen data. So we hope that you'll take a look at that. And then another map that's focused on children's lead risk from housing. So if you just want to take a look at our new indicator of children's lead risk from housing, that's a good way to examine that information. Further down on this site, we have a release and event timeline that we'll be updating as information comes in about our upcoming workshops. So there's a good way to be able to track that. A little bit further down on the site, we have a video that's from version 3.0. We developed this in version 3.0, but it's just a nice overview video of what CalEnviroScreen is. And then below that, we have some downloads. So here you can get our reports for draft version 4.0. And also below that, you can get the data. So you can access the data around CalEnviroScreen in Excel format and also in GIS format. So we've been working hard on developing this online content for you for version 4.0, and we're really looking for feedback as what other information could be useful on these types of sites. And thanks so much for allowing us to go through that. And so I think moving on to the next portion of this presentation, on those workshops, we'll be having more information coming soon on workshops that we're going to be hosting, where we can have more small group discussions and more specific discussions on CalEnviroScreen data and how it's represented in communities throughout California. These will occur in March and April, and they'll be a little bit more regional focused so that we can, instead of talking about statewide trends, we can really get more specific in a community, and you'll be able to access information on when those workshops are on our website and also on our Hub site. We encourage you to get on our listserv, and we'll be sending out notices on our listserv. And I think there's a link coming up on that as well. But we really encourage folks who want to talk more about draft version 4.0 to come to these workshops and be able to join Zoom breakout rooms with us so that we can talk more about CalEnviroScreen with you. So how to comment on the draft? We've already gotten a bunch of great comments through the Q&A today. You can send additional comments through the Q&A. We have a comment system through our website, shown by the URL there. You can also email us with the email address there, or if you prefer to send a paper comment or a letter, we also have an address there, so that where you can send this to. And the deadline for public comment is Friday, April 30th. So with the remainder of the time that we have today, we're going to try to answer some of your questions. We won't have time to answer everyone's question, but we will try to get to some of these questions. So to use the Q&A function on Zoom, we see that many folks have submitted questions already, but if you go to the bottom of your Zoom panel, you should see a Q&A button that's there, and then you'll be able to enter in your question. So why don't we take a quick break, just a 1-minute break, and we will start trying to answer some questions that you have. So we'll just take 1 minute, and then I will ask to see if we have some questions to answer. Okay, so we've just taken a brief pause there, and I want to check in with one of my colleagues to see, I believe it's Kelsey, to see if we have any questions and who might be able to answer.
All right, hi Walker, thanks for that. So I think the first question we have is going to be for Laura, if she can answer. So given that the lead indicator is not a direct measurement and instead a composite of two proxies, i.e. poverty and age of housing units, how was it decided to add it to the exposure group rather than the environmental effects? And what was done to reduce double counting given that poverty is its own indicator? What in the geographic spread of high-ranking census tracts for lead, and are they mainly in denser urban areas? So a bit of a long question, but if you could take a stab at that, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, I can maybe start to answer that question as well. Yeah, so we did a lot of evaluation of looking at different proxies for developing the indicator of lead exposure from housing. And we evaluated literature looking at childhood blood lead levels, looking at how did the different factors such as income and age of housing relate to if we're actually seeing elevated blood lead levels in children. For example, there were some Haynes studies done from the CDC and some other studies looking at blood lead level testing. And we saw that the relationship between both poverty and age of housing, with the weights of being about 60% coming from housing and poverty around 40%, leading to sort of the odds of the likelihood of children having elevated blood lead levels. So we saw that consistently. So we felt that the indicator would be a good proxy for exposure and actually having elevated blood lead levels. So that's why we proposed to include it in the exposure indicator. I'm not sure if anyone else from the team might want to add on to that. Let's see, so what was the other part of the question? to reduce double counting because poverty is its own indicator. I think that is why we used information on low-income households with children, and we specifically used the information that factors in regional thresholds, the data from HUD that we use for our housing burden indicator, where cost of living is factored in at a county scale, and that including households with children. And so we felt that using that specific measure combined with housing would reduce double counting as well. In terms of the geographic spread, I may have to, maybe, I don't know if Komal on our team wants to say anything about that. If not, I urge folks to take a look at the map. I mean, we do see areas, urban areas with older housing. However, we see in addition, maybe not typically considered urban areas like Fresno also having some of the highest scores for the indicator as well. So I'd open up to anyone else from the team saying anything on that, or we can go on to the next question.
Thanks, Laura. I think we can just go ahead and go on to the next question because we have quite a few here. So the next one I'm going to direct towards Yana. So it asks, is there going to be any new or additional disadvantaged communities in this version?
Hi. Okay, so I'll start with the answer here and welcome additional engagement on this point. Historically, we have at CalEPA used CalEnviroScreen to designate disadvantaged communities for investment purposes, largely through implementation of SB 535, which Laura explained a little bit earlier, which requires some focused investments from our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. These are monies that come out of the Cap and Trade program administered statewide. We anticipate continuing to use CalEnviroScreen, although we, of course, are open to certainly discussing with community residents, with representatives of residents across our state, how we might be able to refine that designation in ways that work better for folks on the ground. And of course, CalEnviroScreen is not only used for the disadvantaged communities designation, right? That's one of the uses. This tool has a lot of value that expands across other programs, implementation efforts, things like our enforcement efforts, things like our public engagement and outreach efforts, et cetera. So just want to make clear that this process is really designed to understand what's happening with the tool itself, the updates with the tool, other uses, certainly to identify disadvantaged communities, but also beyond that, what else can we be using CalEnviroScreen for? And should we be using CalEnviroScreen for? And then we will have a separate process for the disadvantaged communities designation that will likely also be reliant, at least in significant part, on the CalEnviroScreen tool.
Great, thank you so much, Yana. So the next question will be for Walker. So it asks, for groundwater threats, are you incorporating new groundwater data from the statewide PFAS investigation being conducted by the water boards?
Okay, thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so I can talk a little bit on that. So the way that we download the data for the different cleanup sites or the or groundwater threats data or other sorts of regulatory sites, especially that we're pulling from our sister boards and departments, is the data represents a snapshot in time, a data download, in this case, for leaking underground storage tanks and for groundwater cleanup sites. And so that's representative of a point in time in 2020. And so the work around the PFAS studies or investigations may be involved or incorporated in. I'd have to look and see how that could be folded into the various types of cleanup sites or cleanup work being done at different locations throughout the state. That being said, I do re-download and create a new snapshot of all of the data in between the draft and final version where we can. So where we have more up-to-date data available, we're able to have a more recent representation of that data for the finalized version of the tool. So for the person who asked that question, I think engaging, during this comment period would be really important, just so that we can think about how to best represent that in the tool. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Walker. The next question we have here is for Laura. So it asks, very curious about what you mean about ground truthing and how that will look like once you begin doing it.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so we mentioned we're going to be using the virtual platform, obviously, in COVID times. In previous versions, we've really been in different communities, impacted communities, and had small group discussions where we were sitting around maps and talking about updates and indicators in the map. And so I think with the virtual format, in terms of ground truthing and engagement, the virtual may offer the ability to actually use our interactive maps. So we're hoping to be able to put out interactive maps for all of the 21 indicators. As you saw, we currently only have our results maps and the lead indicator, the new indicator, available. So the goal is that by the regional workshops that we'll have those interactive maps. And so we can break out into breakout rooms within the Zoom platform, focusing on a region, and really get input from community members and stakeholders using the interactive maps to talk about what is included in CalEnviroScreen, looking at some of the sites, for example, and facilities, and really getting that feedback on if that reflects concerns from community members, for example. So we really do also encourage some input from folks on how they'd like to engage in the workshop. So we have our contact email at the end, so we'd welcome any ideas on that as well.
All right, thanks again, Laura. Next question should be an easy one for John. When is the draft CalEnviroScreen 4.0 expected to be finalized?
Yeah, sure, I can take that. So, so we are in the public comment period, and we will have the public comment period open for a number of weeks, closing on April 30th of this year. And after that, we'll of course be considering the comments and making revisions and preparing the final version based upon comments received. So we do expect that will take a little bit of time, but that we should be able to release a final in the summer of this year.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Okay, there's a lot of questions here, so we're still kind of sorting through them. Let's see. Just give us 1 second here. Okay, we have one here, maybe for Laura or anybody else who might be interested in answering. Are you working on a lead risk from air emissions indicator as well, or incorporating lead data into a current pollution indicator?
Okay, sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself. Sorry, the question was about air lead risk from air. So we do have in our toxic releases indicator from the US EPA's TRI data set that would factor in to air. We did explore other smaller sources of emission, and so I'd say maybe Kelsey, we can get the contact info from the person that suggested or had that question, and definitely follow up offline or when we finalize.
All right, yeah, that sounds good. We'll make a note of that. Another one, maybe for Laura again. California tribes seem excluded. How are impacts to tribal communities being evaluated?
Yeah, definitely great question. And yeah, so we've you know, we've had communications with our CalEPA has its tribal advisory committee, and I participated in that as OEHA's tribal liaison to try to get input on what are some impacts that are felt by tribes with respect to environmental pollution and vulnerability. And we do see that, you know, there may be some unique aspects that tribes face that may not be considered within our overall suite of statewide indicators, for example. We did, you know, we have made some, have included some, have been able to address some data gaps with respect to tribal data in this update. We did include for our environmental indicators, working with US EPA to include sites that are not in our state indicators and included but are tribal on tribal lands included into there, for example, in some of our cleanup site indicators or solid waste indicators. And we made an initial effort with respect to drinking water quality on tribal lands to begin the process to incorporating tribal water systems. And we were able to incorporate data on monitoring for 12 tribal water systems. There's about 100 in the state for systems that purchase water from a nearby city or other community water system. And so, yeah, so we continue to look forward to, you know, to engaging on not only how we can fill the data gaps, but I also think within the sort of the designation process, sort of how to integrate sort of the unique experiences that tribes are facing and how we can best reflect that in CalEnviroScreen. Yeah, I also might mention, I'm not sure if Jana wanted to touch upon that, not to put you on the spot, but I think we'll definitely look forward to engaging at the workshops on that and may try to get on an agenda for an upcoming tribal regional meeting, for example.
All right, thanks again, Laura. And this will be our last question for today, and that'll be for Walker. Will the Q&A and responses also be made publicly available?
Great, thanks, Kelsey. So the Q&As will be part of the public record, part of the comment being the comments submitted on CalEnviroScreen. And yeah, and so it's typical for and part of our process for us to post comments received on CalEnviroScreen, on the draft of CalEnviroScreen, and responses to those comments. So that is a typical process that our group goes through, where we receive comments on CalEnviroScreen and then respond to those comments and post those comments. Are anonymously posted, but they are responded to, and that's made available on our website as well. So we are all out of time. Thank you so much for everyone attending and contributing. It's an impossible task for just our team to do this work, and so we really rely on all of you here to be contributing to the evolution of CalEnviroScreen. I'm going to share once again in the chat a link to our listserv. Please sign up for our listserv if you're not already signed up. You'll get all relevant information on upcoming workshops. And our email is listed on the slide as well. If you want to reach out, we're happy to continue to engage with you throughout this process. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a great day and goodbye.